Hi, my name is Dave Sanderson. Welcome to the Red Jacket podcast. At Red Jacket, we believe wealth is the fountainhead of flourishing, not just for you and your family, but for a society. We work with clients who want to grow and protect that wealth. And the greatest destroyer of that wealth is taxation. Direct taxation, income tax, corporate tax, and indirect taxation, inflation, which is built into the fiat monetary system. On this podcast, we share with you our insights, our experience, and our relationships, not just so that you can fight those forces, but so that you can exploit them. We hope you enjoy. Thanks for listening. Thank you, because you're doing such a gigantic You're making such a gigantic contribution to the world. I really feel this way. As I was preparing for this, I was just struck by the generosity of your spirit, and as we'll talk about, what's really in the offing here is like, it's not too much to say you're trying to save the world. Really, I mean, it's not putting it that too far, because as we're going to talk about, if these two forces smash, if inflation smashes with our current economic system, you know that the reaction to that might be that we devolve so far, we could end civilization. I mean, it's kind of a strange thing to say, but it's truthfully, it reminds me of the Don't Look Up movie, right? Yeah. The meteor's coming, and you're the guy saying, hey, the meteor's coming. I got no interest in saying this, but I'm saying it. So let's talk about it, right? So I want to just say thank you on behalf of the planet for what you're doing.
Thanks, Dave. Yeah.
And
but I think not just when you see something that most of the world can't see, you kind of why can't people see it? Like what is and am I wrong, or is it correct? And then if I'm right and people can't see it, then how do you get more people to see it? That's really it.
So you wrote that piece. I've now forgotten the name of it, but it was that point is where when you make when you cross the Rubicon or the chasm or whatever. So I just did this a year ago or a year and a bit ago, Jeff. I knew nothing about Bitcoin. And my nephew said to me, I said to my nephew, super smart guy, what are you reading? He said, I'm reading the Bitcoin Standard. Okay, so I read the Bitcoin Standard. And I think to myself, oh my gosh, I didn't know this. And then I start to look at my friends and I say, how can you not know this? But the reality, hey, a month ago, I didn't know it either, right? So there is that thing, right? Where you sound like you're sort of waving dead chickens and people are looking at it like, what are you on about?
Yeah.
So, yeah. So that's who we're going to be talking to. So our audience here at Red Jacket are, let's just say, they're busy entrepreneurs that don't have time to go down the same rabbit holes that you've gone down. And they think to themselves, well, I don't understand all this stuff. The world seems to be working. Everybody's talking about these foreboding things that might happen, but every year or every day I seem to wake up and the civilization's hanging together. So I guess it's just the very next person wanting me to believe that they're going to save me. Right. So it's hard for busy people to get to the bottom of this stuff. Well, let's do it this way. Let's start with you. I'm going to do a short version of your resume because I think it's so beautiful. You go to university for 6 months and then you're 19 years old and you're in front of a telephone trying to sell real estate. And so that's like, I love that story. And you have become such an entrepreneur that Goldman Sachs or Morgan Stanley or whomever calls you one of the 100 most intriguing entrepreneurs. And you've got technology startups too, that we could exhaust a whole hour going through that. So congratulations on all your success and your, humble beginning. If there's anything you want to say about it, say it. But I think it's a beautiful.
Yeah, no, ideally you'd go as fast as possible on all the paths we could get to, because there's nothing yeah.
Love it. All right. So I want you to do, the book, everybody, is called The Price of Tomorrow. Jeff is not an author by vocation, nor does Jeff need to make money from this book. And yet it has become a bestseller. And so it should. And so for the people who are listening and who are busy with lives and building great companies, etc., there's really two core premises of this book, and I want to address them both. One is, I love the first sentence of your book, technology is deflationary. So there's premise number one. Let's talk about that first. The second one is that the current economic system depends on debt. So let's talk about that one. And I heard you say recently in an interview that neither of those two facts have been credibly challenged as you've gone around the world talking about this book to thousands of people. So maybe just start there. Is that an accurate statement? And
Yep.
then dig into technology being deflationary.
Yeah, so let's start with that first one. The book is sold probably globally or half a million copies.
Wow.
So it's been translated into now I think 14 different languages, and so and everybody technology is deflationary. It's all around us. We can see it. It's exponentially deflationary, or it should be. And everybody said, okay, yep, got that. And then directly goes, but we have to live in a world with inflation. Right. And that construct doesn't make any sense. They're two polar opposite forces. Now, I understand the existing real world we live in fails spectacularly because the debt collapses unless you have inflation. But that is a very different thing than conflating technology as deflationary. With that, so that leads to, we're in a transition between systems. One which we've all lived in, that we measure our world by, that looks a certain way, that we can't see, that we're inside that system, measuring that system, and it's getting worse and worse. And the outcomes don't just become worse for the world at writ large, they could become worse for us too within it. But we can't see it because we're constantly taking these short-term actions to protect the world we live in. Well, technology keeps on marching along. And so you needed a transition mechanism from one system to another system. And that transition mechanism is Bitcoin. Although I do understand why, if you didn't understand what I just said, or Bitcoin at that level, that you would reinforce your views in the existing world.
Okay, let's start with technology is deflationary. It sounds trite. It's never been truly challenged, but just give us a couple of your best indications of that, i.e. we're on fold 34 or 35. I think that's an incredible way to position it. Yes. Energy is going to zero, intelligence is going to zero, information is going to zero. I mean, so just do some of that stuff so our listeners can say, oh my gosh, yes, technology is deflationary, and it's all in front of us.
Yeah. So I talk about this in the book, but if you fold a piece of paper on itself 1 time, 2 times, 3 times, 4 times, I've asked that question, what would that reach at fold 50? And I've asked that question to tens of thousands of people all over the world. And typically the answer is about 2 inches. Most people, 99% answer about 2 inches. Some say to the roof, but on fold 50, that piece of paper, if you could fold 50 times, you can only fold 7 times. But on fold 50, that piece of paper would reach to the sun.
To the sun.
To the sun. And 2 inches versus the sun is a pretty remarkable difference. And it just shows how bad we are at understanding exponential patterns. Same thing, penny doubling every day for 30 days. These things we thought about as kids, and they sound like parlor tricks. But it just shows that all of us are really bad at understanding exponential patterns. And then we understand that, then we get the parlor trick. We think it's parlor trick, and we go right back into our world thinking we would get the next one when we can't. Why does that have important implications? Because Moore's law is doubling at that rate, and it has been for, call it 34 folds of a piece of paper. And we're in the middle of fold 34 to going to 35. So we're in the big steps of change. And when you see artificial intelligence 5 years ago, 10 years ago, that people sounded like nothing, and now artificial intelligence where it is, and everybody going, oh my God, it only gets faster from here. And you can't predict that change, how much that's happening. It moves, and then from 36 to 37, again, exponential from there. Now, all of these things are supposed to make prices cheaper as they remove labor, and they're supposed to do it on an exponential rate and free our time as a result. Now that's really hard to see from the existing system, but that's what it's supposed to do. Just the calculator app on your phone is free because prices fall to the marginal cost of production. And the marginal cost of production of a calculator app is free. It's code. There's no other entrepreneurs in the world who want to go and try to create the next calculator app, because if you look on your phone, there's 50 of them competing for your attention, and they're all free. So you can't make money on it.
Well, and you and I are approximately the same age. I remember buying the Texas Instruments TI 35, and the TI 35 was that handheld thing. And I was it I don't know, $80, $79.99, 40 years ago, right?
Yeah.
And now, as you say, that thing is on here for free. So that's happening, and it's been happening, but we haven't felt it.
And that's why, and when you see people put up the inflation chart, technologies going down, houses are going up, energy going up, food prices are going up, and it's the most idiotic chart in the world, because what people think is, oh yeah, technology prices go down, but everything else goes up. What's actually happening is all prices should be falling at that rate. But the manipulation of money is driving consolidation of some prices to be able to overcome that technology, because there's technology in energy, there's technology in all of those things as well. All of those things should be falling at a rate that is increasing over time. Yet because of our existing monetary system, what would happen if you're trying to make prices go up by manipulating currency when they should be coming down? That currency would race to more scarce things like housing, like energy, right? It would race to those things to be able to. So that's the reason they're all going up. They all should be coming down, but people are so used to measuring their world through that existing system, they can't understand that they should all be falling at that rate or at some sort of rate. And then they race into those assets faster and faster to try to protect themselves from the currency being manipulated underneath them. That's what's happening.
Okay, so we're going to get to how the current system, what I've been thinking of the fiat system, but what you more accurately call the debt system, has that effect. But let's just stay a couple more technology examples and just the ones in the future.
So let's just say a really important thing in a free market or over a long enough time horizon, prices fall to the marginal cost of production, period. Okay. It's well known in economics. So how do you stop that from happening? You could regulate an industry, right? But if you regulate an industry, then what happens is the competition happens elsewhere in the world. And that still eventually happens at some time, right? So you could try to protect your industry and so stop that prices falling from the marginal cost to the marginal cost of production. You could create a monopoly to try to stop it. Similar, and here's an example. Kodak had a monopoly in cameras and tried to stop the innovation from photos that they invented, and photos are still free, right? And it didn't stop Kodak. It didn't stop the photos from becoming free, prices from falling to the marginal cost of production. It stopped Kodak participating in that gain because their business model is built on something else. And Kodak's
an example where technology was coming, but they didn't see it.
Yeah.
Right. They were the incumbent.
That's normal. That's normal because the monopoly tries to, and that's normal, whether it's a regulated monopoly, whether it's in healthcare, whether it's in, it's completely normal, whether it's in money itself, that the monopoly tries to stop technology from changing the rules, but it keeps on changing the rules. And that's why prices fall to the marginal cost of production, because what ends up happening is the people most incented to be able to keep that drive are furthest away from the monopoly. They're most hurt
Right.
from the monopoly. And then if you use any of these examples, the first person that didn't have the monopoly on calculators that could create a digital calculator made a whole bunch of money as that felt. And then more and more people raced in to create better and better calculators. And instead of being 5 cents, be 1 cent, then free. So that's why that happens. But again, on a long enough time horizon, no matter what regulation, that will happen. Now, what is the world we live in? We live in where more and more things are moving on the rails of technology, faster and faster and faster, meaning more and more things should be becoming free. But we live in a world that we're trying to get more jobs to be able to pay for things that are artificially rising in price, to get more jobs to make things artificially rise in price. So it's if you heard of infinite regress,
No.
turtles all the way down. It means our assumption of our world only works because of a bad assumption, and somebody's going to manipulate money all the way down. And so all the way down, and we live in this thing that we're measuring from infinite regress that has that doesn't, it's built on nested assumptions that are wrong all the way down. Somebody can essentially, and at the bottom of that infinite regress is this: somebody has the power to just destroy your money so that the whole system can thrive. At the same time as technology is driving prices down, meaning what that means is that somebody having power to destroy your money means you're concentrating all of the productivity gains that should be flowing to society through lower prices in very few or eventually 1 or 2 people's hands. That's ultimately what that looks like.
Okay, so let's finish off on tech, and then we'll go over to the manipulation of money, because I think that's a harder one to understand for people. Yep. It feels like a conspiracy theory, but it's, now that I know what I know, it's just a simple fact. So things go to the marginal cost of production, and you've made an example of photographs. You are also saying that labor will go to the marginal cost of production, and it will become close to zero because of artificial intelligence and robotics. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
But before, because and it's a trend towards there. People are scared of a light switch, and but it's a trend towards that there. And so my thesis, so there's a lot of people in the world stuck in a thesis that we can make up money, and and somebody will redistribute to all those people, and they'll work harder and harder and harder to be able to make up more money to pay. So there's a bunch of people who believe that this world will continue to do that, and somebody should be able to be at the top and decide who gets what. My thesis is a complete opposite. It says, why wouldn't we let prices fall at the natural rate? And
because it's abundance around. That's the byline of your book. It's right around the corner. We could be living in an abundant future. Who doesn't want abundance? Today,
not next year, not, remember, it's exponential, but today, average working all over the world would look like 10 hours a week for way more than you have today. For way more. Meaning,
if you got this manipulated system out of the way.
We got to be careful. We got to be careful on that, because this transition is going to be ugly. It's going to be. But if you just said we lived in a different system the entire time and prices continued to fall, our lives would be a lot better than, and you'd be working way less. Essentially, your time would be worth more. And quickly, just before I go to the next step, I talk about oxygen often. Why is oxygen free? Right? Why in your room right now isn't somebody racing and giving you an oxygen mask to be able to, so you can breathe for this podcast? And
because it's everywhere.
Yeah, exactly. You just go, that's ludicrous, because it's abundant. Well,
Right.
that's the same thing. That's the same reason why no one's charging you on your photos today like they used to. And it's the same reason why technology produces that everywhere. It becomes ludicrous from the new system because you can't charge money on things that are abundant. Prices fall to the marginal cost of production. And technology gives you that abundance everywhere as it removes the jobs to be able to do it. Prices automatically fall. So what that means is that productivity gain that's moving benefits all society rather than just a few by being able to be by able to concentrate up by manipulating money to be able to concentrate up. And so now the same thing I just said in some people in the world, and I would be an example, right? I don't have to work. I don't have to work any hours. So because I'm on the top, and created technology businesses that result, and they get stronger resulted because of the capture of that productivity to people like me, or to people like BlackRock, or to, and at the very top of that, to people like Bill Gates, to be able to, they're the beneficiaries of a system that steals the productivity from the world. So some people don't have to work at all. Some and we believe that it's a free market, but it wouldn't look like that at all in a free market.
Right. Okay, so labor is approaching zero because technology, as you just said, reduces jobs. Do you think energy is going to be abundant and close to free at some point?
So I'm going to use a real example right now. On now these are obviously complicated, so we won't be able to just go through all of these at the level in the time we have. But
and let's just agree, Jeff. Let's just agree. Nobody should take your word for anything. Don't believe it just because you said it.
Yep.
But do this. Here's a smart person who's immersed himself in this. He's come up with these very simple things to go and check. Is technology deflationary? Our price is going to go lower and lower and lower. Okay, check it out. If you come back and you want to change Jeff's mind, give me a call.
Yeah.
Then secondly, as we'll get to, the current system depends on inflation. And if we douse it with deflation, we're going to have a gigantic explosion unless we do a transition. So go check that out. Does the current system depend on debt creation and inflation? And so just the only purpose of this hour is to highlight these things so that people can go check it out. Don't believe him just because you said it. Okay, go ahead.
So how does I don't know which way into this. Okay, I'm going to come into this way. All over the world, you, me, all over the world, we are limited energy, limited storage, and limited compute. That's what you are. That's what I am. On an area to find more energy, more storage, more compute. That's what we are. When we find more storage, taking our brains and adding books, more information, so that we can compute on more storage, humanity goes through these incredible explosion of growth. When we find more energy, denser energy, same thing happens, moving from fire to coal to oil to nuclear, if that was the case. But when we find that, because more energy times more compute, and it all presupposes linking together our brains into a supercomputer through money, which is just trust of other people's labor.
Interesting. Okay.
And so I could tell you, and then so the more people in the supercomputer, the more people in the supercomputer, the more compute and the more opportunities to create vibrant society, which we all live on top of. So that's why cities, more supercompute, outperform towns, and more people race to the cities. But you could argue the opposite side of that thesis, and you could say, what about in a city with no trust in currency? No supercompute, right? It doesn't work. And so that's kind of what, if you just said money is an information layer holding that trust together all across the globe. And so why that ties to energy as well, and why that is, and if you asked about free energy, and yes, in time we will have free energy, but why doesn't it look free today? Is because energy to support the city needs to be centralized, and it produces risk in the centralization. And then instead of energy being chasing abundant energy companies have to make a choice to be able to pay back the capital cost of the energy. So I use a Site C dam in BC as an example. A choice was made into doing Site C because all of the regional companies that were providing energy to the grid had to be shut off to pay for the Site C dam. So today, a whole bunch of excess energy just got shut off because otherwise the price of energy would have fallen too much and you couldn't pay for the new dam. So companies have to choose because of an economic rationale to support the centralization. And so they don't chase abundant energy. They chase energy that can have a return on capital. And so that has profound implications in this centralizing force, and it produces risk to a centralized system in the energy, because if the energy grid goes down, or if the energy doesn't have enough energy at peak production, people complain. So those choices are all manifested into the market. And Bitcoin specifically, by producing an economic availability or economic rationale to chase cheap and free energy or stranded energy all over the world, allows you to decentralize energy in a pretty profound way. So it achieves way more energy. Energy is critical for society, and it gives a cleaner, greener abundance in energy by changing the economic rationale to it.
Right. Okay, and one last one that I found was in your book that was very profound was self-driving cars and what that's going to do to the infrastructure and therefore cost of everything. So maybe do a couple minutes on that, and then we'll close the door on technology driving prices down to very hard.
Yeah, I would just say from what people and just because I built many companies and on boards of very many companies, I think one of the things that I find fascinating, or the where people make a bunch of mistakes, is they look at the first order consequences of something, and they don't think about the second, third, fourth
Right.
consequences of all how everything changes as a result of that consequence. So sometimes they see, oh wait, great, self-driving cars, that's going to, and then they don't see that their choices in advancing self-driving cars might remove a whole bunch of labor in the markets of everything else, or trucking labor, which is one of the number one jobs, and they think, and then, oh well, that's okay, it won't affect me. And then they don't see, and furthermore, they wouldn't see how that change on we use our car about 5 or 6% of the time. So my capacity utilization on my car is 5 or 6%. Most of the time it sits in the driveway, and we have two cars. So if it sits in the driveway, 2 cars, the entire architecture of a city has to be redesigned to be able to have parking everywhere for that. And we pay for that parking everywhere. And so with a change in self-driving cars, assuming that's next year, 10 years from now, it doesn't actually matter, but it's coming, right?
Yeah.
And at some point, as self-driving cars come, we might pay for our car as a service, and then have it go pick up other people while we're not using it, and we increase our utilization from a 5 or 6% to 100% or 90%, and it completely changes how many cars are sold in the world, what the roads look like, what the parking infrastructure looks like. It changes everything as a result of that change, and it's all deflationary.
Right. Okay, well, that's beautiful. And like the folks at Kodak, it seems to happen very gradually and then suddenly,
Yeah,
right? So the
that's right.
fact that we maybe don't have this visceral sense of prices dropping doesn't mean it's not going to happen suddenly a couple of years from now or 5 years from now, whatever. Yeah.
But here's why this is so hard for people to see. The prices would drop a lot faster if we weren't in a system manipulating them higher. And they're
Okay, so
measuring,
let's
and
go there. Let's go
they're
there.
measuring,
Help
yeah, they're
help
measuring
people
your system.
understand.
Yeah.
Right.
So, probably the hardest thing is this: every single decision in your world, or most, if you're not in Bitcoin all the time, spending all of your money in Bitcoin, if you're making money in the existing system, if you're trying to gain more yield than the money is losing value, right?
Mhm.
Faster, all of the existing systems, if your job is getting, I can't make enough money to pay my house, or food's gone up and everything else, all of those decisions from that system are actually making that system more unstable. And it's a global, 99% of the people on the planet are doing that exact same thing, measuring that system from the very system with manipulation. And here's a couple of just kind of, because when I say manipulation or theft in a system, it's hard for people to get it. So they want to push back. I think your advice was really good. Just go and explore some of these things and see if what I'm saying is true. But there's approximately $300 trillion of debt, or sorry, $400 trillion of debt in the global system today. And if you paid back a dollar a second of debt, it would take you approximately 32,000 years to pay back 1 trillion. So I would advise everybody on this podcast just to go up and just Google a million versus a billion versus a trillion, and take a picture of what that looks like on Google. You'll see stacks of money, and you'll see a representation of of a human on what that is in difference. Now think 400 trillion, and realize that it's already insolvent. It's completely insolvent. The only reason it's existing is because somebody somewhere is saying, I can manipulate, I'll make up more currency units, right? As to believe it, to keep it solvent. So it's already insolvent, because you'd have to believe that the productivity gains that would reduce prices and make it harder to pay
Right.
could pay all that back, right? So again, it gets harder to pay because the technology is moving this, and that should make it more expensive in real terms. So everyone in the world lives on an assumption that it's okay for somebody to manipulate money to keep that going. And that manipulation of money has massive consequences, because inflation is the exact same thing as wage deflation. It's the other side of the coin. So, or savings deflation. So what it says is, we are going to allow people to manipulate money to hurt some people to benefit others. And because that's the system we live in. And so that's is the system we live in, and it's global system. So if you had that system, and it's actually theft, right? Nobody votes for it. There is no vote for inflation. There is, so it is actual theft. Somebody is allowed to manipulate money and steal your time in the name of helping you. So if you had that system all over the world, that you believed that was critical for society to function, ask yourself this: what would the emergent complex behavior of society look like if it's just based on trade all over the world, us rationally acting with each other, if it was built on top of theft? And if you looked in the mirror reflection of the world, you could see that expanding, and you could see the mirror reflection of that world reinforcing upon itself. Who would win out of that system? Who would lose? What would that system look like? And that's the system, unfortunately, that we live in. And it gets worse And it gets worse because technology is moving one way. And this system has to manipulate money at a faster and faster rate to be able to keep it solvent because it's already insolvent.
And when you say manipulate money, can you be more tangible with that? Who,
Well,
I mean, I think I know this answer, but for our audience, who's manipulating the money?
so central banks making up more monetary units, banks pretending they're solvent. No, again, they don't have a choice right now. So and I'll even go one further. Yourself, if a politician said this to you, system's already insolvent, we're not going to do this anymore, and your real wages are going to go up next year, but your fiat wages are going to come down. So your real income, this stuff, so in other words, prices are going to fall faster than your wages. If they said that, you would think they're insane. You'd never vote for them.
Right.
It's impossible. In other words, we want to hear the lie. We wouldn't vote for the truth. We want to hear. We want the politician who will say, "Don't worry, we'll give you more money." And the rich person on top says, "Don't worry, we'll give you more money." The entire divide of politics is just theater on top of a system of who gets to manipulate your money more and how much they are going to give one camp to the other camp on top of that system.
Yeah, and let's be clear that both parties are in this category. It's not about conservative and liberal or Democrat and Republican. It's like choosing between Skittles and corn pops for breakfast, right? They're both going to do this. But let's be more real about when you so what are they doing?
So
they're creating money,
creating more monetary
their policy ideas, right? Because they think their policy ideas are going to fix the world. So we just need 100 more billion to do X. And once we do that, electorate, things are going to be good. Okay, go ahead, print another 100 billion. So let's go back to how much money's been printed and why did they do it? And they will keep doing it forever.
It has to be exponential. These two curves are exactly offsetting each other. Has to be exponential. So, but just a really simple thought experiment would be this. There's 8 billion people in the world. There's 8 billion monetary units in the world. Right. And let's say of those monetary units, you had 2, right? Yeah. And somebody else had 50 cents, somebody else had 25 cents and everything else. So I'm not saying this would be even all over the world because some people produce more value than other people. Right. But let's say there's 8 billion monetary units in the world and you had 2. And all of a sudden somebody could create another, say they created another 8 billion monetary units out of thin air. Right. And you all of a sudden had 3. You would think you were winning, but you were losing. Right. That's what's happening. But it's happening at the tune of trillions and trillions, and our mind can't comprehend trillions of dollars. They can't. It just so breaks our brain, and so we can't see that happening, and what it's doing to price signals all over the world. We think we're living in the same world we always lived in, this free market and everything else. And underneath that, the entire thing is getting destroyed by what I just explained. And so people believe I'm getting richer, but their real income is going down.
Well, okay, but isn't it also true that the theft that's going on is if I already have some scarce assets, like a cottage and a house and a stock portfolio, I keep winning because all those things are getting inflated. So I'm a rich guy. I'm winning. Who's losing? So the folks who don't have that stuff, who are living or earning a living wage because their wage doesn't go so far.
Exactly. Their rents just went way up, and they don't know how to pay for that. They're getting more and more mad around. Probably an easier way to say that is in the existing system. Use a monopoly board example, right?
Yeah.
go around the monopoly board, and you can win on that game to if you land on the right squares early and you buy the right houses, then you put houses on that, and eventually the game gets kicked over, right? People just get pissed off and they get kicked over.
Right.
Or oh, you won, I lost, let's start a new game. Ask yourself, what if the game couldn't end? What if the game kept happening? What would the people do? And so today, you move around the monopoly board, and you get $200 as you pass go. What happens? This magical bank says, "Don't worry, next we're going to give you $400 as you pass go," and it got harder and harder to get around the board, and all the prices just rose from all the people who had assets, and you couldn't get around the board. And then they said, well, we're going to give you $600 to go, and the assets rose again. You couldn't get around the board. Eventually you'd get tired of playing that game, right?
Yeah.
You'd kick the board game over. That's a global reality of the board game we're playing, right?
It also makes very tangible this thing that's hard to get your head around, which is to say the reason there's inflation in prices is that the central banks around the world are printing money. If you just looked at that plastic tray of monopoly money that we can all envision and say, okay, I don't know how much is in that tray when the game starts, but let's say it's $10,000. If somewhere over here, the banker turns around and prints $5,000, he just reduced the value of every dollar by 1/3. And all of a sudden, the price of Park Place just went up 50% because everybody's got 50% more money. That's what's happening in the global monetary system.
So can you believe, it boggles my mind that people, they all day long, every day, they're looking at all these people on TV saying what their inflation rate should be, right?
Right.
And we believe almost universally that inflation is required for a productive society, right? And we're questioning what rate. But what you just described is inflation is theft, making up more monetary units and just taking some is theft. So you might as well instead ask, what rate of theft is required in society to run a productive economy? And yet, oh, it should be 2%. It should be 5%. It's
a little bit of theft.
We don't question theft. We question the rate of theft.
Okay, so I want to stop you there because my firm, we talk about, and you've taught me a different language, but we say wealth is the fountainhead of human flourishing, right? Let's not be down on wealth. Wealth and human flourishing are very correlated, but you call it, I think you'd use the word abundance. So that's a better word, right? But anyway, what destroys wealth? Well, we used to say taxes. So you do everything you can to minimize your taxes. So taxes are a confiscation of wealth from the wealthy, right? A redistribution. Okay. But then there's this other thing going on, which is indirect taxation, which is this inflationary pressure. So one is confiscation, but the other is outright theft. And who are they stealing from? The bottom half. And who are they giving to? The top half. Yeah. Like it just dawned on me.
Yeah. And who are they? Like who are, like, why do we have a system that like we, and here's the thing, we vote for that system.
There you go. This is a huge point. We get the governments we deserve.
We vote for that system with all of our time reinforcing that system. And that's why I guess you could march against the system. You could, if you march against that system and put a different person in on top of that system, it actually gets stronger. All of the things we do inside that system just make that system stronger because it's built in. Nobody will vote for a complete collapse of society, and nor should they. That's actually why you have to have a transition mechanism.
Okay, let's go there. So we've established, or at least we've suggested, somebody ought to go and prove us wrong on the deflationary force of technology. And then that thing is going to destroy the current system, because just to be clear on this, if you have a whole bunch of debt out there, and the world does, if you go to pay that debt back in the future with dollars that have deflated, that's where the collapse comes, right? Yeah. So we have this incredible force hitting a situation that can't take it. Yep. So that thing explodes. So
So what
what
so
is, I noticed in your book, Bitcoin didn't get a big, you weren't really promoting.
one paragraph.
Yeah.
One
Okay.
paragraph at
So
the end.
yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so because I wanted people to understand first what we were dealing with, and there was a transition, a humanity level transition happening from a system that we all lived in and measured, and what would normally happen through a transition like that. How many people would see it? What would that look like? I didn't want it to be a Bitcoin book. I wanted it to be what we're dealing with, because here's a higher probability. And I explained it, I walked through it in Us versus Them in the chapter in my book. A higher probability, at least in the short term, is we go to war because it's easier to believe our existing reality. And it's easier to believe a person can solve this problem.
We go to war. Did you just say?
Yeah.
Is that what you said?
Yeah. Because how do you consolidate power? You have to create you create an enemy, and then inside the country you consolidate power by creating an enemy. As you do so, because the entire foundation of power rests on manipulated money, then once you've created enough power, you have to change laws to protect your power. You have to remove individual rights and freedoms to protect your power. That's what happens throughout history. That's what ends up happening. And then as you do that, as people start realizing, wait, this is just an illusion, there's no savior that can do this, that savior has to create a problem somewhere else in the world, another problem, for us to believe and give more power to be able to and what happens throughout the world in that case is, to consolidate that, we create a bigger villain somewhere else. That's and most people, and wars are massively inflationary, because everybody says, oh, you got to win this war, turn on the money printers to be able to win this more, and people will buy into that, and they'll reinforce that system. So that is the world that unfortunately is getting more and more likely all the time. And you can see this in what's happening if you're just reading the tea leaves or the signposts. If you just open your eyes, and what you're thinking in the world, and what you think about Ukraine or Russia or China, everything else, what you're thinking is influenced by that same system that you're reinforcing, right? And you think you won't be hurt by it, you're going to be hurt by it. So Bitcoin, now remember, most people live their life on top of a system, right? Their value that they deliver on top of the system without understanding the system underneath. So my house is going up, my job's safe, everything else on it. So the value layer that comes on top of that, technology is giving me more and more and more, and I'm winning, without understanding how that could be getting worse and worse for you and others. But because they don't understand the depth of how this system works and what this looks like, they don't care about central banking. They care about their lives.
Right.
They don't care about how central banking is tied to the same thing, all the problems they're seeing in politics. They just care about their lives. They don't want to investigate down that deep to the plumbing level. You, through maybe my book or Bitcoin Standard or just some others, decided to do a deeper dive on is what Jeff is saying true, right? And to get to the plumbing level. So similarly, they don't want to get to the plumbing level of Bitcoin, right? So and so most people talking about Bitcoin right now are explaining the plumbing level of Bitcoin, and it's really hard. It takes for people, it takes 1,000 hours to unwind their brain from over here to start to understand, wait, something could have vastly different results. And what's happening on top of Bitcoin, essentially the asset, the neutral reserve asset around the world, that is what most people know of Bitcoin, is you're getting layer 2. It's developing in a protocol layer, and now you can have a payment mechanism on top of it. It transfers value all around the world, and layer 3 is coming. And so what's happening today in Bitcoin is it's becoming the new peer-to-peer decentralized internet. And it's emerging. And if you're living in that world, you will see it's not Bitcoin price going up. It's all prices falling forever against Bitcoin. It's a new, because it's outside of the system that's being manipulated. And so, and then all of the value, all of the things that are coming on top of that system that give more value and make it easier to be able to use the plumbing behind that system are emerging, and so it's very similar, because I built businesses through this. It's very similar to when I told my parents that I was going to build an internet business, and they laughed at me and said it's an internet business, right?
Isn't that the way every generation? Yeah.
It's very similar. And so I understand why it's so confusing, but I would encourage your audience, if they haven't, I wrote an article called Finding Signal in a Noisy World.
Yeah.
And you can find that at jeffbooth.ca, but I would encourage people to just take a read of that article as a starting point to start understanding why Bitcoin is different than anything else, any other cryptocurrency or anything else, as a foundational layer, and what's coming on top of it. And from that point, people need to do more work and everything else, but it'll help start to frame what's happening here in a really confusing world, right? And something that's very confusing.
But once you get the framing right, I'll speak for myself. Once I got the framing right, I see it everywhere. I see it on the news. Every time I turn around, I see an example of how the current system doesn't work and how Bitcoin's going to solve it.
Yeah, and by the way, we don't typically, I study the science of this too, how our minds change and everything else. And that pattern interrupt that just said, wait, if technology is deflationary, then I need to update my model, right, of my brain on how the world works, right? Because most people won't update their model. They'll throw out something that's true, and they'll try to make their existing model of the world fit with something that's completely illogical. And it creates
evolutionarily, that's been a winning formula evolutionarily, because we don't have time to build new models, right? Yeah.
That's why. So these changes that radically change a foundational part of your model, you don't update in your brain. You don't typically update in your brain. What's more likely for most people is to try to make their existing model work with that information. What you're seeing around the world as inflation rate is going up, as chaos, as misinformation is, and people are turning against each other, what you're seeing is really a symptom of what I just said. You're seeing people trying to update their existing model with more information around that manipulation, that it's okay. And eventually what happened to you, what happened to me, what happened to is, once you update your model to say, wait, this is what is happening, then everything else just makes total sense. What's happening, but you realize the whole world isn't going through it yet. they're starting. It's really slow in that process.
Okay, beautiful. And a quick couple of things. So we talked about the two premises of your book, and then the third thing is Bitcoin. So number one, I think I've heard you say that it is indestructible, or it's here to stay. It's inevitable. You still feel that way, and help people understand, as a guy who grew up in tech, you have an assessment of Bitcoin that is worth sharing.
Yeah, that's why I said they should read the article, because I won't be able to go through it in depth here. But I mean the physics tied to this, and the economic rationale tied to it, and the way that this is constructed. I wouldn't say it's inevitable unless I really had a strong conviction to the depth of why it's inevitable. That's why I would encourage people don't just take it for face value. Go deeper. Go deeper on. But I also totally understand why protocols develop in layers, instead of like a company that sits on top of a protocol. Like the protocol of the internet itself is the bottom of that layer is TCP/IP, developed by DARPA in the late 60s. but the layers harden over time, because the foundational layer, if it's not hard and you build the next things on top of it, the whole thing falls down. So you could look at the Bitcoin most people understand as kind of effectively the price of a Bitcoin, and it is layer one of the new internet.
Mhm.
And so for a long time now, imagine this. Imagine you had a system outside of a system that was 10,000 times bigger and had all of the power in the world to destroy it. Because if this system won, if the new system won, then it redistributed the power from all of the power players, all of the money and everything else, BlackRock's, all of the top companies, all of the money. It took the power away from them because of the new system. You could just, if you were thinking game theory, you could imagine how much misinformation, how much that system would do to try to kill that system, the new system, right? And now you could see through that lens of what you might be viewing as the misinformation in Bitcoin.
Right.
Is what's happening. That system, but Bitcoin evidence base is more decentralized and more secure every single year.
Yeah.
More and more and more. So the more attacks make it stronger. It's literally gets stronger and stronger as a base layer.
There was a time, probably in the first couple of years, where the system could have crushed it.
But it could have crushed it.
But that window has closed, correct?
Window is closed.
That's amazing. I mean, here we have this huge problem, this intractable problem, right? Deflation and our debt system, but also at the very same time in civilization, the answer to it that was immaculately conceived 14 years ago or whatever, right?
But you could imagine, now you're inside that system, you're inside that transitional system, and what would it look like to you if what right now we're saying is true, but you are measuring your world from that system, from that
right.
So it would look to you exactly like it does, and then from there you could also see all of the altcoins and the crypto and blockchain and everything else, all the nonsense, because for a long time on the base layer, all Bitcoin did is kept working every 10 minutes, every time new block, and a bunch of people created a whole bunch of wealth there, but you couldn't build anything on top of it. Right. So all it did. So wouldn't, in a world that was transitioning like that, where some people created a whole bunch more wealth and you couldn't build anything on top of it, wouldn't it be logical that a whole bunch of entrepreneurs could say, "Oh, I have a better Bitcoin. I have a better Bitcoin." Right? It'd be completely logical, right? That this is old tech, and here's this new blockchain that's going to do this. It's completely logical, because they would miss. Then another layer is formed on top of Bitcoin that can do something else that gives it more value without sacrificing the first layer. So we're still in that transition right now, and we will be for a long time. But that's if I just look at just a higher level on why human action would create all of these things, and where we are in this, just completely logical.
All right, let's close there. At the human level, what is your assessment of our chances of doing this transition somewhat peacefully? I mean, how do you handicap the next 20 years?
Yeah, retain flexibility. So make sure you own Bitcoin and cold storage, but it's going to be a messy transition. So I asked, what would the world look like if the emergent complex behavior of society was based on theft? Ask yourself, what would the world look like if the emergent complex society was based on truth? That's really the choice.
Truth and trust and exchange of value. I mean, it's such a beautiful world.
But really, just truth first.
Just truth. Yeah.
Right. Just truth. All of the other things are emergent from that truth. Right. So, because all of Bitcoin is, at least a bit, is just an open, decentralized ledger that is the truth that everyone in the world has access to. And as more and more of the economy moves on top of it, it heals the world, and we can trade between people all over the world. So it looks really positive. It looks extraordinarily positive. And then ask yourself, which world do you want to spend more time in?
Right.
So if you actually, if the first step of Bitcoin, first understanding what we're talking about now, but I suspect a whole bunch of your audience will do this. If they understand, or if they go deeper, they might buy Bitcoin, they might put Bitcoin in cold storage, and then that'll protect them, their families, and everything else from what's going to happen. But then they will spend most of their time reinforcing the system that we're still in.
Well, if they buy one Bitcoin, so let's finish here. I just watched Tony Fadell launch the Ledger Stacks cold storage, and he was the guy who helped design the iPod. So our audience can understand that. They say, okay, well, wait a second, these guys are saying that Bitcoin is like the internet in the 90s, and there's Tony Fadell who launched the iPod. He's launching this cold storage thing. Oh, I can see the next 10 years. So if they buy one Bitcoin for 22,000 US, put it in the cold storage, do you still think they'll crystallize their thinking inside the current system? Or now that they own some, maybe they'll open their minds up to this world and go down all these?
They might, but they might. The first thing, put on your own oxygen mask first, right? And the plane's going down, right? Put on your own oxygen. But make sure you have Bitcoin. Don't hold it on an exchange. Buy it in self-custody. Once you've done once you've done that, I would encourage your audience to start actively thinking how I can spend more of my time and energy in the system I want for my family, what I want for my future, rather than the system that is going to take. And as they do that, as the time moves, and the reason I say that is you asked, what are our chances of making this through? The chances hinge on how many people actually move to the new system and spend more of their time in the new system. Because as you do, you defund the old system and you transition it faster. And if most people just say, well, I'm just going to get rich in the new system and wait for it to happen, then it's going to be a really tough transition. And it's all your decision. It's not, there is no they, it's only we. As we move, world moves with us.
That's beautiful. So let's finish there, and let me reiterate my thank you to you, because nobody, I don't think, is doing more to help that transition or help a number of people come to this side than you are. Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks for your time. Thanks very much for listening. We'd love to hear from you. If you have questions, or maybe you have something to add to the conversation, we're at redjacket.ca. And on the website, you'll see the phrase relationships matter. We really believe that and encourage you to start one with us. Thanks again for listening.